Hello, everybody. Have you ever been followed around by a person with a camera, taking pictures of you and your family and your children, and then publishing them in a newspaper or a weekly rag? Well, that happens to people. Doesn't happen to me, probably doesn't happen to you, but we're the lucky ones. But if you're a celebrity, and I know you kind of sign up for this, it's not great to be followed around by tabloid photographers and be splashed across those tabloid magazines. And this is all about tabloids from July 5th, 2012. How tabloids work.
Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Clark. There's Charles W. Chuck Bryant. And this is Stuff You Should Know. It's a podcast. It's audio only. But coming soon, it will also include smells.
Oh, yeah? Mm-hmm. Smell-o-vision?
Not vision. Smell-o-sound. We'll just call it smell-o-rama.
Man, grumpy people today.
I'm not grumpy.
You're grumpy. I'm grumpy. Jerry's grumpy.
I'm fine.
Y'all were grumping at each other when I came in here.
No, Jerry was mad at me for being mad at her, which doesn't count.
It's just everyone's grumpy. It's such a grumpy day.
I'm not grumpy. I just had legitimate gripes.
Grumps?
Gripes.
Gripe. Everyone's gripey. All right.
So, Chuck.
Yes.
I want to tell you about a great American hero.
William Catt?
No.
Okay.
Many years ago, in the wilds of, I wish I could remember where he was found. Mississippi. A little guy known as Bat Boy was captured. He was caught on a rooftop during a flood in Mississippi, and the authorities seized him and took him into their care. He became a ward of the state.
That makes sense because Bat Boys are known to go to higher ground during flooding.
Yeah, and he did. True to form. So Bat Boy, at first he didn't like this captivity, but eventually he kind of became something of a patriot by volunteering to go search for Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda operatives in the caves of Afghanistan. The reason Bat Boy was so good at it is because he was raised in caves. He was half bat, half boy.
Sonar
hence
hearing.
his name.
Sure.
Yeah. He wasn't able to find bin Laden, but he still returned to the U.S. a hero after a long, long flight because he just flew himself.
Of course.
And we know of Bat Boy's exploits thanks to a little newspaper known as the Weekly World News. Have you heard of this?
Two things. I used to subscribe to the Weekly World News.
Did you really?
Yeah, for like a year in high school. Me and my buddy Rad did because it was fun.
Radcliffe.
Radford.
Man.
And two, I didn't realize that Bat Boy, they continued his exploits.
I think Bat Boy sold a lot of papers for the
Well, I knew he did, but I didn't know.
News.
I didn't know they kept it up. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that he was fighting the terrorists.
Yes. He did. He tried to. I don't know if he was successful. At least he went equipped more than with just a sword.
Right.
But yeah, so Bat Boy was a prominent character, I guess, in the Weekly World News.
Good way to put it.
Which also bills itself as the world's only reliable newspaper.
Does it really?
Yeah, that was
I don't remember
its
that.
little tagline or whatever.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's not around anymore in print.
Yeah, I think I remember it shutting down and being sort of sad. Is it online, I guess?
Yeah, in 2008 it moved online.
Yeah.
So really, every aspect of that story, from this outrageous claim that Bat Boy was captured and sent to Afghanistan, to it calling itself tongue-in-cheek the world's only reliable newspaper, to it shutting down and going online because of massive profit losses after being purchased by this huge conglomerate of tabloid papers. The Weekly World News is a perfect analogy for the course of tabloids over the last 20 years as a whole.
Yeah.
And
True.
we're going to dig into that.
I think it's funny. Because I didn't know the little tagline, but I guess they figured if we're just going to be making up stories, because the Weekly World News, for those of you who haven't read it, isn't just a tabloid. I mean, it's fan fiction. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. They don't pretend, but that's why it's funny that they said that they're the only reliable thing.
Yeah.
They said, well, we might as well just say that in the thing. Get it?
Yes. And one of their editors is quoted as saying, "I could only find one source for this quote, so I don't know how true it is. It could be made up," which would be kind of like this
apropos
meta parody of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But he said, if our readers are informed, it's usually by accident.
Oh, really?
So they were well aware.
That's great.
And it is an extreme example, but there are some aspects of the Weekly World News that do fit the bill of a standard tabloid.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So, I mean, let's talk about it. What is a tabloid?
Well, should we start at the beginning, or should we just talk about it a little bit, then do the history?
Do you want to do the history first, man?
Yeah, let's do the history first.
Proof positive that we don't practice this.
So I did see there was one slight error. This is an Ed Grabanowski article, which are always great.
Yeah.
But did you see this other etymology for the word tabloid with the pill company?
No.
In the late 1800s, apparently, Burroughs Wellcome and Company was a pharmaceutical company in England. They produced, at the time, like medicines were all like BC powder and Goodies powder. They're all powdered.
Yeah.
And he, I think, was the first one to make into a pill by compressing the powder, and he called it a tabloid.
Of cocaine.
Yeah, it probably was. And that word became to mean anything, figuratively, that was a small dose of anything. So the word tabloid actually came before, I believe, about 10 years before the shrunken newspaper, the physical newspaper shrinking.
Well, it still works. It's like the origin of life on Earth comes from another planet, but really, where did the origin of life begin, right? It doesn't answer the question. It's the same thing. Like, okay, so maybe that's the origin of the word tabloid.
Yeah.
Then it was associated with newspapers. The tabloid paper is printed on a smaller, more compact version of the normal newspaper newsprint.
Called a broadsheet.
Right.
Yeah.
So the tabloid is a smaller, more compact version. The broadsheet is longer and wider.
Yeah.
And then the tabloid were usually printed on the smaller paper, hence the word.
Yeah. So at first it was a pill.
Right.
Then it became the size of the paper, and then later on it just became the style of the paper.
Right.
And size, but really the style.
But tabloids, as we're explaining them, are basically like they are also commonly referred to as rags, as gutter publications.
Gossip rags. Yeah.
Yeah, they're gossip sheets. Whatever. It's basically it's a slightly shifty, underhanded newspaper. And tabloids, one of the ways that they exist and always have existed is in comparison to, quote, legitimate newspapers.
Yeah.
So, like, originally, newspapers that say, like, the early 19th century, they were extremely stuffy. They were extremely expensive. They were like 6 cents per.
Yeah.
Which was like half a day's pay for the average laborer.
And really dry, man. Have you ever read these old New York Times articles?
Yeah.
It's like, they just really they lay out the facts and then say the end.
Exactly. Like the AP used to do until a few years ago.
Yeah.
The AP always did that.
Yeah, it was sort of straight up
like
news.
Who, what, when, how, where, and why.
The old journalistic pyramid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then like maybe a quote in there, and that was it. And so out of this, I guess, kind of boredom and a need for the working class to be able to, get their news too.
Yeah, because they couldn't afford it.
Came the predecessors of tabloids called the penny press.
Yeah.
So they were cheaper. And they also did something different. They took stories from just these boring facts, political stories, business stories, that kind of thing, and started working on human interest stories.
Yeah.
And they changed the style of writing. Sentences were shorter, paragraphs were shorter.
Injected a little emotion.
Way more emotion.
Yeah.
It was designed for that. Like, listen to the triumph of this family over their evil landlord or whatever.
Kind of what we see now in mainstream newspapers.
Exactly. Yes, a lot of our mainstream media owes quite a bit to the evolution of tabloids.
Agreed.
And there's actually a point where it kind of spread. Finally, it made a jump. But you can see throughout the history of tabloids and newspapers this interplay where tabloids almost kind of break ground, take a bunch of heat and flack for it, and then newspapers like latch on to what they're doing after it becomes co-opted and normal.
Behind the guise of, we're the upstanding publication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just all disgusting.
You're right. I'm disgusted by it all. Yellow journalism came about in the era of William Randolph Hearst with his New York Journal, later called the New York Journal American. And he was the first person in the United States, at least, because I think in England it even started out before us, if I'm not mistaken.
In England?
I think they were kind of like the birth of some of the more tabloid-style writing.
Okay.
But in America, William Randolph Hearst did with, all of a sudden, he started doing some celebrity stuff and some murder and little sensational gore here and there. And he found that it sold really well up until the Depression, when nothing sold really well.
Right.
Pick up after the Depression when a very monumental figure in tabloid history named Generoso Pope.
Or Gene Pope.
Gene Pope.
Junior.
He bought a Hearst paper called the New York Enquirer for $75,000.
Yeah.
Changed it to tabloid size. Started printing, stuff that he figured people like to stare at a car crash. So
he was actually inspired literally by seeing
crash.
People like jockeying to see the blood and the gore in a car crash, and thought, wow, people really are disgusting and crazy. So I'm going to give them what they want.
And he did.
You remember the crime scene photography episode? We talked about Ouija.
Uh-huh.
He sold a lot of stuff to Gene Pope.
Yeah, I bet.
He printed a lot of his like gory crime scene
guy.
photos.
What was his name?
Ouija.
That's right.
Louis Felig, I think, but he went by Weegee. Ouija.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I said it again.
Yeah, I was QAing like the executive orders episode.
How many times?
Like a bunch.
Do you know why? Because it was super interesting. So he starts selling a lot of papers based on this new style. And then a guy named Rupert Murdoch, who you may have heard of, saw or proved that you could actually have pretty wide circulation and began selling News of the World in England, millions of copies, sex scandals. And then the Pope said, you know what, if he can sell millions and millions of copies, so can I.
Right.
Let me change the name to the National Enquirer. Boom.
Right.
The National Enquirer was born.
But the Enquirer, as we know it, still wasn't born yet. It was they were crazy headlines about like interracial sex and lesbianism and like horrible acts of violence, posthumous violence. There was this one headline about a teen ripping the head off of a corpse to get at its gold teeth, and always with the gory crime scene photos.
It's like the pulp comics we're doing too.
Yeah, very
crime
much.
Comics.
It was just very tawdry. It's, I mean, if the stuff on the Enquirer today is tawdry, this was just like
it's not
unfathomable.
Really that tawdry today.
But the reason it's not is, again, because of Gene Pope. So he had a lot of competition. And not just he, but the whole industry was facing a big problem in that newsstands were starting to dry up.
Yeah, sadly.
So Gene Pope came up with an idea. He's like, supermarkets. Everybody goes to supermarkets. I need to get in there.
And they're always standing in line at the checkout stand.
Right. But he knew, like, there was no way that any respectable supermarket was going to sell his tabloid, his rag, right? The Enquirer.
Yeah.
So he cleaned the thing up. Yeah. Right? He added way more. He took a cue from Rupert Murdoch and his News of the World and added way more celebrity stuff, sex scandals, but nothing tawdry like,
nothing
the
gross.
stuff he was talking about before. That was just really, it was more like the senator got caught with somebody or whatever.
Right.
And there's this guy named James Walcott. He wrote for Vanity Fair. And he wrote this article called U.S. Confidential. It was in the June 2002 issue of Vanity Fair. It was about this and about that transition going from, the crime scene photography to astrology overnight so he could get into supermarkets. He said the Enquirer's staff was aghast. It was like asking an experienced team of grave robbers to take up gardening. So that's pretty much how the Enquirer's staff took. We got to clean up our act and start writing about astrology and celebrity sex scandals. And
it wasn't even cleaning up its act that much. It's not like he said, we're going to become the, New York Times.
No. But that's why they're there
Yeah.
now. That's why when you stand in line at a supermarket checkout line, it's because in the 1960s, Gene Pope was like, we got to get in the supermarkets.
I think people either read these or they don't. Like, I don't think anyone dabbles in tabloids. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like soap operas. Like, no one just says, like, oh, let me watch a little bit of Days of Our Lives. Like, you're either hooked on this stuff or you're not.
I agree with that, but I think a lot of people are guilty of picking up the tabloid and thumbing through it and then not buying it in the supermarket checkout line.
Well, no, you know what they do now, and of course we were going to get to this, but might as well bring it up. They look at People magazine and Us Weekly.
Right.
Because they have nicked from tabloids as well and become a quote-unquote respectable thing to pick up and read.
Right.
Even though, come on, you ever read a People magazine?
I have.
It's sort of tabloidy at times.
It is. And actually, you can thank the Star for that. Star used to be a tabloid sheet tabloid.
Yeah.
And it went over to the glossy format at some point, I think in maybe the late 90s.
Uh-huh.
And it married those two things, glossy People magazine format with tabloid. And it was enough of a success that people was like, well, we've already got the glossy magazine part. Let's just start doing the tabloid thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, people have, legitimate articles still, but and they're not like making stuff up, but they've definitely gone way into the, look at the cellulite on the beach in Malibu.
Yeah.
And look at this person and look at that person. And who wore it better?
Plastic surgery disasters.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that.
Who wore it better? I know somebody who's been reading People.
Yeah, when you have the two ladies with the same dress.
It's so mean, especially when it's like 82 to 18%.
I know.
Especially when it's like, it's just mean sometimes.
Yeah. I'm going to start wearing hockey jerseys, and they'll be like, who wore it better, Kevin Smith or podcaster Chuck Bryant?
That'd be
and
pretty
people
cool.
go, I guess Kevin Smith, because I never heard of this other guy.
Right. That's the same guy.
It's the same dude anyway.
All right, so that's pretty much the quick history of tabloids.
Yeah, here in the States at least. England, we keep mentioning England because they're lousy with it.
Well, they're kind of on the leading edge of the decline of tabloids right now.
Oh, of the decline?
Rupert. Yeah.
Oh.
We'll get to that.
All right, so before we go on to tabloid stories and how they get these stories, we should point out that in 1999, the National Enquirer, the Star, the Globe, the National Examiner, and Weekly World News were all purchased by American Media Inc.
Like all of those.
Just snapped them all up, basically. Said,
just
we're
about
running the show now.
Every big tabloid in the United States was purchased by this one company. And I
just think that's never a good thing. Or maybe that's just me being
Well, that's the funny thing.
Paranoid.
Like the title of this sidebar is "They control everything you read,"
unless you don't read any of those things.
So the AMI actually, they're the reason the Weekly World News shut down. They were like, okay, this thing's losing money. Yeah. AMI posted a $160 million loss in 2006 and was facing like $1 billion in debt.
So Bat Boy had to go.
Yeah, Bat Boy went to the internet.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's where Bat Boy belongs.
So, okay, let's talk about this. What makes a tabloid? It's not just subjective. I mean, tabloids like pornography, you know it when you see it, right? It's tough to define.
True.
That's not entirely the case. There are some actual discernible distinctions among tabloids that make a tabloid.
Agreed.
So what are they?
Well, Ed points out here something really important. The key to a tabloid story is not that it be true, just that someone has said that it's true.
You're right.
And they latch onto that person, and as long as they say, attribute these quotes to this person, then they can't be held accountable.
And that person is frequently cited as an expert.
Sure.
And
a close friend.
Sure. I mean, if somebody, it's all the way you present the story. If your whole story is all about how this person said something, it's not really about the story. The story's still there, but you're focusing on this person. It's like the rule of the of the tabloid industry.
It's kind of a trick, though, because
Very much
you're
so.
tricking people into thinking you're reading about a story about Brangelina, when in fact you're reading a story about a former maid that worked for Brangelina,
Right.
and what they think is true.
Right. Or some crazy person who has nothing to do with Brangelina, who
Sure.
just maybe saw one of them in a coffee shop,
Right.
and noticed they didn't tip or something like that. Bam, there's your story. Also, like we said, they like to add experts, but the experts are in no way, shape, or form qualified in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They have no credentials. They're not vetted. It's more, say, the example Grabanowski uses is like a Bigfoot enthusiast,
Yeah.
right? If somebody spends a lot of time searching for Bigfoot, researching Bigfoot, there's no institute out there to qualify them, to give them credentials, but you could reasonably make a case that this person's a Bigfoot expert, right?
Yeah.
The thing is like the Inquirer or the Star or the Weekly World News is not going to the trouble of explaining that. They just say Bigfoot expert so-and-so says that there's a bunch of these things out, and he's seen a bunch.
And he's an expert.
Exactly.
My favorite is the leading quote, they will get the random person who saw Angelina Jolie in a coffee shop, and they will say, did she look, they would say maybe something like, yeah, she looked jittery. And they would say, did she look strung out and that she had possibly been up for days without eating? Yeah, she sort of looked like that. And then all of a sudden, that's the quote.
Exactly.
Is witnesses say she looked strung out and like she had not eaten for days.
Right.
And
all they have to do is say yes.
exactly.
Yes. Or would you say this? And if the person says yes, well,
Sure.
then you just said that. Another hallmark of tabloids is making a huge deal out of something I guess other newspapers would consider small, right?
Backpage stuff.
Yeah, and actually looking through other newspapers to find some quasi-interesting story, and then blowing it up into possibly a front-page feature, just by getting into the story and really interviewing a lot of people involved, and then maybe throwing an expert or something like that, and just basically making a lot of hay out of something very kind of negligible.
Yeah.
And this by adding a bunch of quotes and stuff. And what do you think about this? What do you think about that? It takes it from being about the story, right? Like a man saved a goat from a burning building.
Awesome.
To what these people think about this man and his goat.
Yeah.
And you can do anything with that.
Exactly. The love affair, you mean?
Maybe. Who knows? If somebody said it, then they could conceivably report it.
Yeah. If anyone said it.
Yeah.
Celebrity news is obviously one of the biggest parts of tabloids these days, at least. And the writers have informants, all kinds of informants, from security people who had worked for them or who work at venues where they might have been, hairstylists, nail salon people, like anyone that can dish up dirt. And they get in the rotation. And I remember we shot, you ever heard of Janet Charlton?
No.
You might recognize her. She was a gossip columnist and did stuff for TV like Entertainment Tonight.
Okay.
But that's how she made her living, and she was like one of the more famous ones.
Okay.
And we shot a commercial at her house one time in L.A., and she was there hanging out, and I was like, you got to tell me some stories. And of course, she just loved that kind of thing. And she would just sit down and regale us with stories about Michael Douglas and his secret sex addiction. And she always said, like, well, my sources tell me.
Right.
And she had a list, a Rolodex of people on the bankroll that she would pay, a few bucks if it was not a big deal to a lot of money if it was a big celebrity with big news.
Right. And it's that's pretty much standard. Like you were saying, there's this guy named Paul McMullen who wrote for, I think, News of the World. And Denholm Elliott? He was I
know that name.
Indiana Jones's sidekick.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but the older British guy.
Yeah.
Okay. He was just this huge star in Great Britain. And he was very, very beloved too. And he had a daughter who was addicted to heroin. And after he died, she took like a big turn for the worse. And this cop tipped off, I think, another person who in turn tipped off Paul McMullen. But the cop got a few £100 for it. That this girl was like she's kind of a prostitute. She's so much of a heroin addict. So whatever you want to do with that. So
you can't kind of be a prostitute.
Paul McMullen goes and like offers to pay this lady like drug money for sex or whatever, and she agrees. And like all of a sudden, he starts reporting on it.
Wow,
he's got photos and everything. Well, she ended up killing herself.
Oh my God!
And he now says like, I take responsibility for that, which is meaningless.
Sure,
but it all started with a cop knowing about this and then tipping off the reporters.
That's so sad.
It is.
I wonder what that cop thinks.
Cops are not immune to this kind of thing, too. Believe it or not.
Josh, another way they'll get their information is from the celebrities themselves. From what I've gathered, you fall into three categories. You either fight the tabloids. You either are lucky enough and are smart enough to kind of be low profile, and you're not really a subject of tabloids. Yeah. There's a lot of big stars you never see in the tabloids.
Harrison Ford.
Yeah. Or number three is you play ball a little bit.
Right.
Which means, you know what? I'll give you a little information here and there. I'll leak out some stuff here and there. If you play nice with me, I'll play ball with you. Maybe I'll let you know, like, what restaurant I'll be coming out of one night.
Yeah.
You can photograph me, give you your little time, and sometimes the movie studios will leak stuff to get up a little press.
Yeah.
They did that a lot back in the day, but it still goes on.
Yeah, it's like a symbiotic relationship between the person who needs their star to maintain its position through things like just basically you're a star because the public is aware of you.
Yeah, no such thing as bad press. Like, you might be in there for your cellulite, but what if someone picks up the magazine and they're like, oh, I wonder whatever happened to her.
I thought she was dead.
And all of a sudden they're like, she's not dead.
Yeah.
She just has cellulite.
Right. How sad.
How sad.
But at the same time, I feel better about myself.
Exactly.
So I guess one of the ways that you stay in the tabloids is through having your picture made.
As we say here in the South.
A group of people known collectively as paparazzi.
Yeah. And
they actually, I found out, are named after a paparazzo photographer.
You didn't know that?
Named Paparazzo with a capital P. He was a character in Fellini.
Uh-huh.
Fellini's La Dolce Vita.
That's right.
Movie. And apparently they were already extant, but they got their name through this character. But even then, they weren't crazy. It wasn't until the 70s,
right?
Again, thanks to Gene Pope, that they really became the kind of reckless, relentless nuisances that we have today. And it was all because Gene Pope was obsessed with Jackie O and Aristotle Onassis.
Oh, really?
And he would pay so much money for anything on them that the photographers were like just really, really became aggressive and assertive because of it. And they're way worse in Europe because of Gene Pope and because they initially started doing this stuff in Greece and in Europe.
Right.
And that still is connected to this day to the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. They were supposedly, her driver had been drinking, but they were supposedly being chased by paparazzi.
On motorcycles.
Yeah.
Very sad.
But that's all Generoso Pope Jr. I'll bet that guy wore huge black glasses, thick ones, like Robert De Niro at the end of Casino.
Yeah, God, those were great. Supposedly, Fellini, too, I dug this up, took the word from an Italian word that described the buzzing sound of a mosquito.
Oh, that's nice.
That's unverified, but he said in an interview in Time magazine in the 70s that he's like, I always just associate it with something buzzing around you and in your way.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's paparazzi. And there's that movie, too.
Paparazzi.
Is that what it was called?
From 2004?
Yeah, where the dude, what's his face, goes back and beats up...
Cole Hauser?
Yeah. Did you see it?
Not bad. I ran across it on IMDb today.
It's not bad at all.
It could very easily be based on the life of Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, sure.
Or Sean Penn.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the categories you were describing, the people who are just so big that they can't keep a low profile, but they also don't want or need that the tabloids on them. But I've also very much gotten the impression it's like there's a lot of people out there who feed it to them, who want it, who crave it.
Yeah.
And I can't feel bad for those people at all.
Yeah, it's a tough thing.
And because there are people, plenty, like you were saying, plenty of people out there who are big stars, but you never see anything about them in the tabloids. It's because they just stay out of it. They stay away from it,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. I mean, there's so many. That's probably why I can't think of it. But like Harrison Ford is a good example, I guess.
Yeah. Except when he started dating Callista Flockhart. They were in the tabloids a lot. But I also suspect, like, most of that stuff was all very pleasant, like, hand-holding things. So
yeah, but she was in the tabloids a lot because of her weight, so that fed into that.
Yeah.
You know, like, maybe she'll be happy and eat again now that she has Harrison Ford.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. He's just like, eat this. Eat that, too. Here, eat this.
All right, let's talk about the law.
Yeah.
Because this was really interesting, I thought. Because the first thing you think of is...
the rest of it was not interesting at all.
No, I thought this was super interesting, though. Because the first thing I think of is, why aren't these people suing every day?
Yeah.
Suing these tabloids.
Some try.
Some do. Some have been successful.
For a while, for the early tabloids, ones like, what were they called? Like Confidential, I think, was one of the early tabloids.
Yeah.
Like the Tatler. There were just whatever stupid name about airing dirty laundry. That was the name of some pulp tabloid in the 50s and 60s.
Dirty Laundry was probably one of them.
I'll bet. And they got away with that stuff because, well, for two reasons. This guy wrote...
Bill Sloan?
Yeah, he wrote, I watched a wild hog eat my baby, which is pretty much this definitive history of the tabloids. And he's got his bona fides because he was an editor for the National Enquirer, right?
Yeah.
And he said there's two reasons in the 50s and 60s. One, if you were a legitimate star, these things were so in the gutter that to stoop to suing them was problematic. In one, it was the attention that lawsuit would attract because the regular press was going to start talking about it.
It would make you look as bad as...
it would draw a lot more attention to the original story.
Right.
And then the second thing is even if you won, that publisher doesn't have the money to pay you.
Yeah, good luck.
Then Gene Pope, once again, changes everything. Gene Pope and Rupert Murdoch. All of a sudden, these things have enormous circulations.
Yeah.
I think Gene Pope took the Enquirer from like 15,000 or 100,000 to 5 million at its peak in the 80s. So suddenly they did have deep pockets and things changed. And Carol Burnett kind of still to this day stands as like a bellwether for the celebrities versus the tabloids as far as the law goes.
Yeah, she sued and after a 1976 article said, and I have to read this quote, it's pretty good. At a Washington restaurant, a boisterous Carol Burnett had a loud argument with another diner, Henry Kissinger. She traipsed around the place offering everyone a bite of her dessert, and they didn't put her dessert in quotes, I would have. But Carol really raised eyebrows when she accidentally knocked a glass of wine over one diner and started giggling instead of apologizing. So they basically said she was blitzed at this restaurant, and she
Kissinger
sued.
was there. He went,
Yeah.
Carol Burnett.
He's a big fan, probably.
Yeah.
And she sued and won $1.6 million, which was, and we'll find out here in a second, this is one of the hallmarks of their litigation, settled out of court for much, much less, very quietly.
She got a big settlement because in 1981, $1.6 million is like
good money.
$100 billion today, I think. And then it was reduced by an appeals court, which is usually step 2 in these kind of suits.
Yeah, like $200,000.
Yeah, and then it was settled out of court, so I would imagine for even less than that.
Yeah.
But it was a big deal. It was the first time, really, that like a major star was able to win a defamation lawsuit against a tabloid. But it was one of the... I don't want to say it was one of the only times, but it was one of the very few times, especially if you are going on the premise of all the people who want to sue the tabloids and don't actually bring a suit.
All right.
Because things have changed now.
Yeah.
Now the tabloids have these reputations for being extremely fearsome litigators.
Yeah.
Where, like, if you want to sue them, you thought that story that ticked you off was bad?
Yeah.
They're going to get anything they can, and they're going to do it through the courts. So, like, when Aretha Franklin, or no, Elizabeth Taylor, yes. When she tried to sue, I think, the Inquirer, or when she did sue the Inquirer's lawyers tried to subpoena all of her medical records.
For the past 30 years.
So they go after everything. They try to drag your life into the spotlight to make it, like, really not worth your while to sue them.
Yeah, it's this celebrity attorney that was interviewed for this awesome New York Times article, Vincent Schiaffo. Everyone's Italian. Everybody is Italian. Said that it's basically, he calls it the scorpion defense, which is you don't attack a scorpion because you will get stung. Aside from...
It's not the most complex analogy.
I like it. No?
It's pretty straightforward, I guess.
Do they need to be complex?
But you can call it, that's the snake analogy, that's the spider analogy, that's the 2-year-old analogy.
Oh, like, don't mess with a 2-year-old, you'll get thrown up on?
Or bitten.
Okay.
Pooped on.
Yeah.
You'll get poop on your
That's what they should use,
fingernails.
because a scorpion can only do one thing. A 2-year-old can humiliate you in a number of ways.
Have you ever heard, so there's this whole thing that, like, scorpions commit suicide if you set them on fire by stinging themselves?
Really?
And apparently there's a lot of, like, YouTube videos out there of people, like, doing this with scorpions, like,
That's
setting
awful.
them on fire, and then the scorpion will, like, jump about and, like, sting itself and eventually die. Well,
Probably trying to put the fire out.
they found that that scorpions are almost entirely immune to their own venom.
Ah.
And that really all this is just a reaction of being burned alive. They're, like, trying to, like, they're flailing about, and one of the flails is, like, their stinger's moving, and sometimes it stings itself. So it appears to dumb kids who set scorpions on fire that scorpions committing suicide.
Terrible.
Isn't that awful?
That's a great tangent, though.
Thanks, man.
All right. Don't burn animals or insects of any kind, kids. It's just mean.
That's exactly
And it
right.
means you're setting yourself up for being a sociopath later in life.
Also, legally speaking, with tabloids, you have to prove malice.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Not only that what they printed was false, but that they knowingly printed information they knew was false.
Yeah, because it's got to be libelous. It can't just be...
Maliciously libelous.
They just printed a rumor about me that wasn't true. It's got to have malice behind it. Libel is printed. Slander is stated with your mouth. Those are the two differences.
Or I guess you could blink it out with your eyes.
Yeah, that's true. So basically, the scorpion defense and then the delays. The first thing they're going to do is start filing motions to delay.
Make you spend a lot of money.
A lot of money. So,
and if you think about it, there's nothing to really gain here necessarily.
Well, yeah.
It's your reputation. So a star who has a bunch of money says, I have a bunch of money, and I'm really mad at these guys, and I want to teach them a lesson. So I'm going to sue them. And basically the first tactic is the tabloids try to make it not worth your while, that you'll drop it because you don't really need this money. You're looking for a judgment, and hopefully you'll get bored.
Well, and the tabloids don't care. Even if they drag this thing out and print a retraction 6 months later, no one reads retractions or cares about retractions.
Well, 6 months later, it's a well put, because apparently part of the judgment of some of these in successful suits is that you can't write about this star for a set amount of time.
Yeah, they'll like cut a deal sometimes.
Yeah.
And say, you know what, I'll drop the lawsuit. Just give me a break for the next year.
Right.
And then they put on their calendar, Tom Cruise, 1 year from now, set reminder.
Right.
To start effing with him again.
Right. And another way that tabloids stay out of court is most of their articles are screened by an attorney or attorneys they have on retainer.
Yeah.
So each article it's printed kind of comes with this implicit stamp of approval from a legal expert who's saying, like, you really don't have a case if you want to sue against this.
Yeah, they want to walk right up to the line of libel and stop there, and they're pretty good at it.
And then urinate on it.
And I imagine the writers are really good at it. And then as backup, they have their own attorneys that are even better at it.
Sure.
And so they're like, "Yep, this is not libelous. Prove it.
Right.
Spend $500,000 trying to prove this." And some people do. Like Aretha Franklin, I think, settled. Tom Cruise, Schwarzenegger, Kate Cruz.
Yeah, just
they've
in
all
March.
sued and won.
Did she win? Because Katie Holmes just filed in March against the Star, $50 million.
She settled for a donation to her charity.
Nice.
Unless she's done it twice.
She did it just this past March. She filed suit against him for this one cover.
About the
she
drugs?
has bags under her eyes, and they're
Yeah.
like Katie's drug problem, why she won't leave Tom, all this. And I also, the article kind of goes after Scientology. And
big mistake.
Well, based on that list, Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise, Katie Holmes, it makes you wonder, like, I wonder how much Scientology encourages
Travolta
suing for defamation in articles that also include, stuff against Scientology.
Yeah, because Travolta just had the big row with his little supposed tawdry affairs here in Georgia.
Right. And then I guess another hallmark that's not really in it's not really in the article, but I think you can make a pretty strong case, is that sometimes, a lot of times, the tabloid gets things right.
Yeah.
But the way that they do it often is very much unethical and immoral as far as the standards of the press is concerned. And that's what's been going on with Rupert Murdoch. Like Parliament, like a parliamentary panel basically said, you're not fit to run News Corps any longer because this scandal is so huge with the phone hacking scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Where I can't remember what episode we talked about it in, but there was the girl who was kidnapped, and like the News of the World writers were hacking into her voicemail and then deleting them, and so the police thought she was still alive, and it was possibly affecting the course of the investigation. They identified 4,000 celebrities, athletes, politicians, people of note, whose emails were hacked. 4,000.
Wow.
And then another 1,000 that had likely been hacked. Some people have already sued and won, like Sienna Miller, Steve Coogan of 24 Hour Party People, and Tristan Shandy.
Uh-huh.
Some people have already won, but for the most part, it's these people aren't going to get any damages awarded.
Right.
It's basically just no, News of the World shut down now. But it was out of hand.
Wow.
And now they're showing that they were also hacking email, which Great Britain has this kind of this computer theft law now, which makes email hacking way worse than phone hacking. So if that opens up to be a big thing, people are actually going to start doing time for it.
Good.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
But like I was saying, sometimes they get things right.
They do. Over the years, we'll mention a few. O.J. Simpson case, the National Enquirer, and it seems like it's generally the Enquirer that sort of scoops the legit ones. It's never like the Star.
Yes.
So the National Enquirer scooped in the O.J. trial the story about his shoes, the Bruno Malleys.
Yeah.
They scooped the story of the dealer that sold him a knife similar to the murder weapon.
Yep.
I guess they're knife dealers.
The way they scooped the shoe story, remember there were bloody footprints? I thought this was awesome. They really went to town because there was a Bruno Malley bloody footprint at the scene, and O.J. Simpson said, I've never owned a pair of shoes like that."
Did they show a picture?
They went back and found footage of him from 1993 wearing them on the field, like reporting from a football game.
That's right.
Yeah, and proved that yes, indeed, he did have those shoes.
And he was like, "Oh, those shoes."
Right. Yeah. Bill Cosby's kid Ennis, remember when he was killed?
Yeah, that was sad.
The Enquirer offered a $100,000 reward for information, and that actually led to somebody coming forward and giving the information that led to the capturing of the killer.
That's right. Jesse Jackson's illegitimate child.
Yeah.
In 2001, he came out and was like, "Oh yeah, I guess he found out. It's true."
Yes. Gary Hart, when he was running for president in '88.
I remember this well.
He was on the monkey business down in Miami with, what was her name, Donna Rice?
Yeah. Such a funny photo when you look at it now.
He, I haven't seen it, I don't think.
She's just like sitting on his lap, and he's just got a big grin on his face, and he's got a T-shirt that says Monkey Shines Crew, and
yeah,
it was all over the place at the time.
But he dropped out of the race. It was because of this picture in the Inquirer. They scooped everybody on it. And Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, my favorite drug addict that was exposed, Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, remember he was buying OxyContin from his maid.
Lots.
It was on like how many pills a day?
He bought, well, I don't know how many a day, but he bought apparently 30,000 pills from her.
I think he was on like some ungodly amount, like 20 or 60 or 80 pills a day. Just so I remember hearing it. It was like, how is he
alive?
Or even not standing up?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was the Inquirer that did that. But again, so there could have come from a tip, right?
Yeah.
It could have come from
the maid.
Yeah, they could have they could have gotten this information from wiretapping, from whatever. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but just one of the hallmarks of a tabloid is that they'll follow sometimes looser ethics than maybe a New York Times reporter.
So tabloids today, Josh, like you mentioned, at the peak, the National Enquirer was selling about 5 million copies in circulation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of the leading ones in the United States combined sell about 5.4 million. So they've really gone down. And one of the reasons why is because they were so successful that mainstream media became much more tabloidy.
Yeah.
And tabloids became much less different. Mainstream news.
The field of competition increased.
Yeah, and basically everyone was kind of doing similar stuff now. And Ed pointed out in the article during the Lewinsky trial, sales went down because stuff you were seeing on CNN and was just as salacious as anything you would read in the Star.
And again, it's like the mainstream media kind of took a cue from tabloids, as they have so many other times before.
I bet they were so pissed off about that.
What?
With the Clinton thing, they were probably just like, let's make up some stuff. Let's like, what if he used a cigar? And they were like,
well, that was the crazy stuff about. Yeah, exactly. It was all true.
Yeah.
With Clinton. Man, that was nuts. Looking back.
Yeah.
So you got anything else?
I got nothing else.
Well, then that's tabloids, Chuck. Tabloids.
Ta-da.
If you want to learn more about tabloids and see a picture of the beloved Bat Boy, you can type in tabloids, Tabloids, in the search bar at howstuffworks.com, which means it's time for listener mail.
All right, Josh, I'm going to call this Don't Cry For Me, Josh and Chuck. Hi, guys. I'm currently working in Argentina, conducting research and teaching English on a Fulbright scholarship. I wanted to let you know that your podcast serves as a great resource for English learners in other countries. I've been introducing your podcast to students and adults I meet who are interested in furthering their English and learning more about U.S. culture.
Nice.
Yeah, a little scary too. The idea of a podcast culture does not yet exist in Argentina. When I introduced the idea and your program to people here, they were very curious and eager to listen. They make great wine too, by the way.
Argentina?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good stuff. Your podcast is providing a fun, informative way for students here to practice listening to different English accents, to try and pick up on some colloquialisms and jokes, to learn new vocabulary. Boy, I feel a lot of heat all of a sudden. And to become more informed on the various issues you discuss. The idea of people listening to podcasts purely to further their own knowledge is a part of U.S. culture that I am proud to share. And thank you very much for that. Spreading your fan base in Argentina, Angela Hartley.
That's very nice. Thank you very much for that.
And
We're
congrats.
becoming cult-like figures, like Rodriguez.
Who?
There's this singer-songwriter from, I think, the late 60s, early 70s, and he just went by the name Rodriguez. He released a couple albums that just totally flopped here, and he just went the way of obscurity. Didn't realize that in South Africa, these two albums achieved just incredible status over there. And everyone wondered what happened to him. And then finally, years later, he found out he's a mythical figure in South Africa.
Really?
And now there's a documentary that just came out about the whole thing.
It sounds like a movie or something.
There's a documentary.
Well, it sounds like a feature film.
I know.
Like something someone would make up.
I saw a movie like that. You mean I went to Silver Docks and saw The Imposter.
Oh, yeah,
and
you recommended
it was
that.
very much like that, where one of the producers afterwards at the Q&A was like, he was asked if they were going to turn it into like a feature film. And he was like, we can't. Like, there's just too many.
Great.
It's too outlandish that if you fictionalized it, people would be like, this is stupid. Why'd you make these choices?
Ooh, I want to see it.
Yeah, you should. It's very good.
Awesome.
Well, okay. If you have a documentary recommendation, so I guess it'd be a documentary recommendation.
A docu-rec.
Thank you. We're always looking for that. Is that correct, docu-rec? Because I think I've seen that written before.
Really?
Yeah.
I just made it up.
You can tweet to us at SYSK Podcast. You can join us on Facebook.com/StuffYouShouldKnow, and you can email us your recs to stuffpodcast@howstuffworks.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.